Facebook is up. YouTube looking, still thinking about it. There we go. Now YouTube is up. Or no, it's not. Maybe not. Hold on.
Have you come to these before? Okay, this is your first time too. I have a couple burning questions I've been wanting to ask.
All right, great. Well, so we're up and running now on Facebook and YouTube. So welcome everybody. And I'll keep it on Facebook. Usually we get more questions on Facebook just because more people watch it on Facebook. But somebody came on kind of Zoom. A lot of people, I was telling Mary before we came in, a lot of people don't really use Zoom anymore. So it was using a lot during the pandemic, but now sort of people don't really come in on it. So fine. But just kind of give a baseline, since it's first time for some of us. Basically, we have this, we've been starting this every week now. We did this over Lent, and mostly Lent this past year. We called it God the Father Pens with the Priest. And so it's really meant to be an open discussion. So it is really not a set topic. It's really not a set schedule. It's, if you have a question, I'll try to answer best of my ability. If I don't know the answer, I'll try to find out for you and get back to you. Okay, maybe be the next question for the next meeting or whatever, right? Now, we also kind of implement what we call Friends, Food, and Faith. And we've been doing that since, was that December of 2019, where that's actually more a guided topic. So like next week, instead of Bob and Father, we're going to have Friends, Food, and Faith. And the topic next week is, why does the church disapprove of certain forms of government? After 4th of July, kind of makes sense maybe to talk about that a little bit. So we'll see more. Hello, evening.
Hi.
No, we're just getting started. So perfect. So really, that's kind of the gist of what this is all about. This is really just kind of more an open discussion. If there's any questions, try to answer them, and we can talk about them and go into some more depth if necessary. And I'll keep my eye on Facebook to see if there's questions online. But otherwise, the floor is open. So whoever wants to start, feel free.
I actually had a question, but I don't want it to be morbid. And if it's controversial, say, okay.
Well, this is not, hey, whatever. This is what this is all about, sure.
So I'm really not concerned, but curious to know what the church thinks teachings on feel silly saying this, ghosts and hauntings.
Ah, sure, spirits, yeah.
Yeah. And now I'm certain what the church is teaching about evil spirits crawling around the earth.
Sure.
That part, but like the actual hauntings and people who see their dead relatives, and I know we believe that people intercede for us when they die and all, but like actually feeling their presence.
Yeah. So really, the church teaching when it comes like the presence of quote unquote ghosts, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe it's best to put it this way: we understand we all have a soul, right? That soul is immaterial. It doesn't have a body, right? When we die, our souls are separated from our bodies for a certain amount of time. Who knows how long that is, right? Where eventually, we believe in the resurrection of the body. Their bodies and souls will be reunited one day in the kingdom to come, right? Now, that's not to say that there could be certain spirits of demonic presence, right? That could definitely be present. When we talk about things like demonic, we have kind of 2 or 3 major ways that we're kind of the presence of demonic, right? So the most extreme case, what you probably hear about, which is more Hollywood type, right? But happens maybe more than people think, is possession, right? Where a demon actually possesses the body of a person, right? There's this power struggle, so to speak, between the soul of the person and this presence of a demon within somebody. The other way that there's a demonic presence is called obsession, right? So maybe a good way to put it in, let's say, I keep a clock on my dresser every night in the same spot.
Yeah.
And recently I've been noticing, I'll go to sleep at night and I wake up in the morning.
It's a true story. Oh, I thought you were doing, this is something.
No, I'm just saying, just like an example.
I'm sorry.
Obsession. So let's say I have a clock on my dresser, and I keep it there every night. And when I wake up in the morning, I notice that the clock is now moved to the other end of the dresser.
Yeah.
Right? Well, there's no explanation for that. There's like no one that came in that did that. I live alone, whatever. That could be a form of obsession.
Obsession.
Right.
Okay.
Where there's kind of like a spirit that's present that's actually kind of trying to drive you crazy or
Yeah.
do something to you, right? So when we do house blessings, right, those
Yeah.
are called minor exorcisms.
Okay.
When we try to drive out those kind of
Yeah.
evil spirits within the home, right? So in some cases, like, well, yeah, that could be very true. Now, when it comes to like maybe a loved one, well, there is a common experience a lot of people have that when they have a sense of loss, they start having these kind of reminders of the person,
Yeah,
right?
right. Yeah.
Or maybe even start seeing the person,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Well, the question comes down: is it a psychological act? Is it a spiritual act? The church really doesn't give a definitive answer on that. As far as like, yeah, this isn't really true. It's not really your brother or husband or whatever it is. As a matter of fact, the church that kind of opens up says it was very possible maybe there could be somebody, right, of a loved one, right, or some other spirit that's kind of possessing that. Now, on a metaphysical and from a theological standpoint, what does that mean, right? Because we teach from the church that there's only really 3 states of being after this life, right? There's hell, which we hope that we don't go to. There's purgatory, which is like a transitory state, right? Now, could purgatory kind of, have a projection onto this temporal life? Well, possibly, maybe that's a form of purgatory, who knows? And then of course heaven, where you're with God completely, right? So I think the question is kind of open as far as, well, is this possible or not? It probably could be, right? The church can say no. So I think the question is sort of open when it comes to that stuff.
That's interesting. Yeah.
With an interesting kind of Father Robert Spitzer. I don't know if you guys ever heard of him. Yeah, he's a Jesuit priest. He's the president of Gonzaga University. He has a background in astrophysics. He's a brilliant guy. He wrote a couple books, and he does his books kind of tend to deal with more like faith and reason, like kind of like how science can be used to kind of confirm things we believe, that kind of thing. And one thing he's written about is like near-death experiences.
Yeah.
And there's a commonality in that. So I might answer some questions maybe about some of those things.
Spitzer?
Yeah, Father Robert Spitzer, Spitzer.
No, definitely look at
So he might have some answers when it comes to that, but his question is more dealing with like near-death experiences.
Yeah. Well, that's also of interest to me. Yeah.
There you go. Great.
Not to sound morbid, but.
Well, I think it's an interesting question because I think that happens. I think we all have certain stories about, like, I know when I was younger, we would my dad, we were at this thing called Dad and Lad at Esper. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of that. So I was, I was Boy Scout. My dad was a Boy Scout. We were out there one summer, and I've seen it, and I could swear that we were coming back from a bonfire, just my dad and I, along this trail back to our campsite, and we saw this woman kind of walking out in the woods, and we kind of even like called to her, like, hey, you need help? What's going on? And got no response, and then she just walked off. It's like, okay, fine. Well, we came back from that camp. We found out a week later that they found the remains of some woman out at Esper, who was the wife of a scoutmaster. And it was like weird because we kind of like, oh, that kind of fit the description of what we saw, right? So, but yeah, so I think it's kind of a common. I think everyone has had one.
No, and hear stories of incredible people who don't normally
Right.
would not expect to.
Right.
Do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it could be like some form of purgatory for them. Maybe it's a form like a limbo. Maybe, I mean, we don't really know for sure, right? So yeah.
Well, then that is good. I'm going to look into Robert Spitzer.
Father Robert Spitzer. SJ.
Yes. Well, that sounds really good. Thank you.
You mentioned about blessing your home.
Mhm.
Do you need to have a priest to come in to do that, or if you have holy water, can you bless your home?
Yeah, so when it comes to blessings, we have to understand there's kind of a hierarchy in that, right? So for instance, like, a mother blessing her child, that's a completely valid blessing. It's a good blessing, right? But a mother can only do that for her children, right? It would be kind of weird if you went to your next door neighbor and started blessing their children, right? I mean, it could be done, but it's not necessarily like, what's the purpose of this? What are you really doing? One of the duties of an ordained minister is they're given that authority of the church to bless in the name of the church, and then by doing so, they're also blessed in the name of Jesus himself, right? So it's not necessarily that you can't like bless your house. Of course you can. Awesome, do that. But the authority, it really is a question of where the authority is coming from. You as a baptized Christian, your common priesthood, you have certain authority in that. But it would be different from like a minor exorcism that's actually given by an ordained minister. right? And that's really what a house
Yeah,
blessing
and
would
I'm
be.
not even talking about exorcism,
Yeah.
I'm just talking about blessing your home.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with like maybe sprinkling water on your bed. Yeah,
Okay.
beautiful. That's wonderful. It's actually a good devotion practice, but we have to be understand also not to cause scandal or bring confusion.
Yeah.
That's different than from when an ordained minister comes and blesses something. So, for instance, if you were to sprinkle holy water on your bed, awesome. Is that bed now a sacramental? No, right? Now, if I were to come over and bless your bed, is your bed a sacramental? Yeah. Technically, if I'm blessing just the bed, yeah. And so the question kind of raises, well, what do we do with the bed then if we're done with it?
Yeah, well, that's.
Well, you can't throw it away,
No.
right? So do we know what the proper way of disposing of sacramentals are? Burying or burning?
Yeah.
That's it. So you got to be very particular about what you want blessed, right?
Sometimes I go and I bless the doors.
Yeah, that's
Holy
fine.
water.
Sure. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with doing that, Mary. It's just that, but the thing is that's not the same thing.
Okay, yes, I know.
Yeah, right. So we have to be very careful about that. Yeah. Good.
And then the blessing without just the blessing that you're talking about is just as if you prayed over your child when they were sleeping.
Yes.
Something like that. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is it's a wonderful practice to do, and I encourage anyone to do it.
So this is also kind of a question, but if you're the minor exorcism, and I'm going to guess that probably every place around here at one time or another probably had a house blessing.
Probably.
Yeah. So that is
that's binding.
Forever.
Right,
yeah. Okay.
Right,
Forever. Okay. Forever.
Yeah. I mean, so like what happens is here's the thing: we don't keep a record of that.
You don't. Yeah.
Right. So like if I go bless a house, I don't put some book somewhere saying, "Oh, I went over, I blessed the Rose's house." I don't do that, right?
Yeah.
So the question is like when let's say 20 years from now, I'm gone, Monsignor's gone, everyone that really worked here is gone. Someone moves into the new house. Do they know it was blessed or not? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, right? But it's always good to fall on the side of caution, right? So why not have the priest come out and do it? Yeah, it's probably a good bet that I would say a majority of the houses here in St. Louis Hills are probably blessed at some point. But we don't know for sure.
No. Right.
Right. And so, but also too, there's a newness involved in the fact there's a new family. Because when we talk about blessings, that is a good point we want to make too, is that it's not like these are magical instruments anymore, right? That when we bless a crucifix, we're not blessing the crucifix itself. We're blessing the owners of the crucifix and those that gaze upon the crucifix or those that pray with the crucifix. That's really where the power of the blessing comes from, right? Same thing with a house. We're not blessing the stone and brick and mortar. We're blessing the family that's living in there and anyone that actually comes into that house, right? That's the purpose of the blessing. So we want to be careful of that because sometimes we think, oh, these sacramentals are now they're magical instruments that we go out and, wield against all the evil. Well, yeah, in a way, sure, but it's not the fact that the thing is blessed, it's that the person that's using it is blessed. That's really what it comes down to. So yeah, it's a good point. We want to be very clear about that too, because I think sometimes we get confused with that.
Well, I always had, when I lived in Tennessee, my kids were growing up, and I moved a few times, and when I bought a house, I always had the priest come and bless. It was odd for Tennessee, but I didn't think of it as, I didn't really think there were evil spirits or anything. That never occurred to me. I just thought of it as trying to make it a whole, I don't know what a whole.
Yeah, make it one place, right?
Right,
sure.
something like
right,
that.
whole space.
Yeah,
of course.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think that's very true. I mean, we call it a minor exorcism, but that's what that really
I
just
didn't
means.
think of that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, so there's only certain things that really applies to house blessings and really baptisms, right? So baptisms, there's a minor exorcism involved with that for the actual anointing with catechumen, oil catechumen, and the baptism itself, right? So part of that's a driving out of evil. And so the blessing of a house is doing that. You're trying to drive out the evil to make it a holy space for the people that are dwelling there, right? Now, can that be defiled? Sure, right? And so would a place need to be re-blessed if that were to happen? Probably a good idea, right? You hear stories sometimes about people with like Ouija boards or
that's
whatever.
scary. That is really.
Yeah, I mean, so I would say that if that were to happen in a house, whether you knew about it or not, that's probably a reason why it's good to get it re-blessed because you don't really know what the people before you were doing there, right? So,
That's true.
yeah, so it's not a bad idea to do that when you move to a new place. Yeah. So,
Yes.
great.
I have a question. Go on.
I have a question that's been bugging me for a long time, and that is, I think you addressed part of it maybe last week.
Okay.
So it's kind of maybe it's 3 questions, but I want to understand better why Pope Francis is so controversial. And I want to understand why the bishops defied him in their vote. And there's also a priest that I read about in Wisconsin that did the same thing. He said he made things political
Mhm.
and was asked to resign, and he refused. And it said in this article in the paper that he raised close to $700,000 to defend himself. I don't know what that means to defend himself, but
Yeah.
I mean, what's going on here?
Okay, so you have multiple questions there. So let's start with the first one. Why do we perceive, or why is Pope Francis so controversial? Well, I think part of it is, I look back at my own life, especially when I was working. I was had other things going on. My faith life was maybe not so much a priority on me. It was with my political life, right? So yeah, whatever. Not that they go hand in hand, but still. I think a lot of times, though, when I was getting news, I wasn't reading articles. I was getting my news mostly from headlines because who has time to read an article, right? So I think part of that is the way that he's portrayed in the media. And so I think a lot of times, which I mean for understandable reasons, I think in some cases, that a lot of media, they try to get a soundbite that is appealing, right? We like in the internet, you call it clickbait, right? Oh, hey, well, that looks interesting. I want to click on that and see what's going on, right? So I think sometimes these quotes are put out there to kind of gain interest. And then the rest of the story may be played, but even then, the rest of the story isn't really given. With Pope Francis, the context is very important. So like when he first came into office, was elected the Pope, he said he was presented with a very interesting question that really didn't have, it was kind of obvious where they were leaning. It was kind of a leading question in a way, right? Apparently in Rome, there was a big outbreak of STD, basically kind of shrouded around male prostitutes. And so this kind of moral quandary, it almost seemed like Jesus in the temple, like the Pharisee is like, hey, what's the best law? What should we? And it was kind of presented to him as like this, like, well, okay, what is it better, Holy Father, for a male prostitute? Let's say they're forced into trafficking, right? Would it be evil or wrong for them to wear a condom if they're in these aspects, right? So obviously, I think that the answer to that is, well, it's best not to do it, right? It's probably best to even get out of that life to do that. But with human trafficking, that's very hard to do. And so I think you look at it as like a lesser of two evils. Say, yeah, I think in the circumstance you're talking about, using of a condom is probably really the best option in that circumstance, which is true. Morally speaking, that's true, right? But the way it was presented was Pope Francis is all about contraception. It's like, well, no, that's not what he said, right? And so I think you have to look at the entire story and get multiple avenues of what actually is going on. Even in his writing, he wrote his first kind of major encyclical after his taking of the office too was about the family, right? And it was actually Amoris Laetitia was the name of the letter, the apostolic, it's encyclical. Mm-hmm. And in it, he's talking about some great things about the championing of the Eucharist and the family, and he talks about some certain situations that we see today with remarried people, right? How we understand that, what happens. And everything says is in line with Catholic teaching. And there's a footnote that he puts in there about remarried Catholics who are living together and have children. And what he talks about is, for certain circumstances, it's probably good that the parents of these children that they're remarried, and they have a combined family, maybe it's good they actually live, share the same bedroom, right? Not engage in their act, but for the good of the family, kind of share a bed, right? which again also is in line with Catholic teaching, but you have to put that in context of what Catholic teaching says. And what it says, yeah, people that are not married in the church, you know, you have 2 divorced Catholics, they get married of justice of the peace. We recognize that is not a valid marriage, right? That can't be a valid marriage. And provided they haven't gotten annulment or gotten confirmed their marriage, you know, within the church, yeah, they need to live as a brother and sister, right? But where is the end of that, right? How is that maybe good? Is it good for the kids to see the separation of mom and dad? Okay, so maybe in that circumstance, okay, to maybe share a bed, but even in that context, they're meant not to actually engage in the act. And then the question of, well, what about, oh shoot, my mind is so off today. Scandal, right? So what about scandal? Let's say this family comes to mass and should they present themselves to the Eucharist, right? The fact they're living not in a married life with these kids. Well, the church is very clear about that too. Provided they haven't engaged in their act and they're trying to live or even striving to live as brother and sister, and they receive the sacrament of confession before they receive communion. Okay, now it would be better pastorally if you said, hey, maybe it's best to go to another church. You know, maybe you should go down to maybe Rayfield or maybe down to Joan of Arc, just so, because, you know, people may not know you there, may not be much of a scandal. Okay, that's a pastoral answer to that. There's nothing wrong with doing that, but that has to be done on a personal basis, and it's really no one else's business.
Right.
Right? So the church teaching is very, very clear about that, but I think sometimes what happens is we tend to focus on these little sound bites or these little things that he says, which on the surface can be controversial. But when you put it in the context of what he's saying, it's like, oh. Or in the context of Catholic teaching, it's like, oh, well, that does make sense then. He's talking about a particular issue for particular people in their circumstances, not universally. So we have to always be very cognizant of that, right? And I think that's one thing that we kind of, in our soundbite world, that we want the 2 seconds, that's it, we keep on moving on, we can maybe lose that in a way. So, but on certain things, though, I think we can say that, well, maybe your holiness, that's not really the best thing to kind of maybe project. But then it comes down to, well, is this an infallible statement or not? You know, and what that goes along with is, let's say the Pope tomorrow says, you know what, I, as the successor of Peter, right, in light of you bishops and church teaching, on this matter, Coca-Cola is the best drink out there, and every good Catholic drink Coca-Cola. Well, there's some problems with that, right? That's a great opinion, and you can keep that. But because that's not a matter of faith and morals, or not even a matter of tradition of the church, that can't be an infallible statement. So if the Pope were to say that, great. Well, that's a great opinion, Your Holiness, but I like Pepsi, so I'm going to keep on drinking Pepsi, right? But other things, like it has always been the church teaching that politicians, especially who are in a position of authority that have some responsibility, are meant to bring their faith into their lives and live that faith openly, right? And so politicians who openly support abortion or contraception or anything that's against church teaching, they really have to do some deep delving and work with their pastors to understand where they're being obstinate. And if they don't change their abstinence, then they shouldn't present themselves for Holy Communion. Now, the question I think there that you're kind of hitting on when it comes to the USCCB is this more of a personal thing, or is this something that's universally taught? And the answer is both and, right? Any Catholic who finds themselves not in a state of grace, that openly preach something different than what the church teaches, that live a life that's not accord with their faith, they're not accord with the church teaching, should not present themselves for communion without going to sacramental confession. And there are certain, for lack of a better term, sins or moral teachings, especially if one is in a position of authority, that are doing these things publicly, that typically requires a public penance, or at least a public recantation of that particular issue. We call that interdict, right? So there's actually, a lot of these are canonical terms, right? There's a lot of canonical terms out there. So there's like, excommunication. Well, that's kind of a huge form, right, of kind of, not so punishment, but correction, right? To try and get someone to actually understand what their error is and to get back in line with church. There's other forms of that too. Interdict is one of those as well. that it really applies for more public people like bishops, priests, but even politicians who are openly teaching something or preaching something that's against what the church teaches. There needs to be a public recantation of that by canon law in order to actually come back into the church and actually fulfill your duties in whatever aspect that may be. And that's kind of where we fall in that line between Catholic politicians and excommunication. So for instance, so Catholic politicians, let's say they go to confession before they go receive the Eucharist, and they haven't had a chance to do the public penance, or recant. Should they be barred from communion? There's kind of different opinions about that, but I think if we fall on the side of charity, we'd say, well, I think based on the circumstances of that person, they should receive the communion in that respect. I mean, even if they're not obligated to every week, maybe they shouldn't, right? But that's also a personal decision they have to make in line with their conscience, right?
Well, it just seemed to me that you would never have a Catholic politician.
That's true. It was
Yeah.
impossible.
Yeah, because I think we tend to look at that things like when it comes down to
Yeah.
major social
Yeah.
issues like abortion,
Yeah.
contraception, same-sex attraction, that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, the same thing would apply let's say, with the death penalty. If you had a Catholic politician that was like, yeah, hey, fry him. There's no reason why you should. Well, no, that's not what the church teaches either. And so for the same reason, you should either recant. I think part of this too is kind of an understanding that, well, maybe there's not a full understanding, which means that person's pastor or bishop has a higher responsibility to kind of have that discussion with them.
But then Pope Francis actually asked them not to go there.
Right.
But they
Yeah.
did
So,
it
but see, here's the thing though too. A request is much different than a command, and really what you're getting down to is obedience, right? So, out of obedience, I should follow whatever my archbishop tells me to do. Well, there's a line to that though too, right? So even obedience always needs to be in line with love and truth. And so if my archbishop tells me to do something that's against Catholic teaching, I am obligated not to do that, and even converse with the archbishop and say, Your Excellency, I don't think this is a good thing to do, and here's why. And for these reasons, I can't consciously do this. Now, he can command me, he can take away my faculties, okay, but that's also part of the cross too. So I think in the same way, though, we talk about synodality and kind of these other aspects. The other thing to understand as well is the USCCB is not a governing body. I think we tend to get confused by that too. It's not like the USCCB says something that becomes an action. It's up to the individual archbishop to put those things into practice. So the USCCB, the Pope can say, yeah, I prefer if you didn't maybe bring this up now. Well, thank you, Your Holiness, but also, we're also the bishops here in this diocese, and part of the synodal aspect of that is we're called to actually deal with certain pastoral issues within our boundaries. And that's what the USCCB is doing. So I appreciate your input. We're not doing anything doctrinally or within canon law. Everything we're doing here is going to have to be approved by you anyway if those we put into practice. So we're not doing anything outside of our mandate. So yeah, I think that's important to recognize too. It's not the Pope said, don't do this. He may have some reasons.
He asked them.
Right.
to do it.
Right. And you don't have to. The Archbishop can come to me and say, hey, would you go to this other parish? Right? I mean, I could say no. That's okay to do, right? As long as I have good reason to resent them. Now that might be, in the long run, maybe a career-limiting opportunity for me, but so be it, right? You're still called to follow your conscience. So I don't hear my opinion on this, and this is just my opinion. I think it's good that the USCCB is putting something out there to help direct and guide not only Catholics but also bishops and priests. So I think nothing they're going to say is going to be outside of Catholic teaching.
Well, I think, I would agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
But when you read, and I don't know how true this is, but it said the Pew Research Group did a study and 70% of Catholics don't believe in Francis.
Which also probably is a good reason why you should say we should have something on the Eucharist and what it
Well,
is.
yeah, I mean, we're
Right.
not teaching people.
Right. Right. And it's interesting to use that word though, right? Because that's the job of a bishop and priest, is to teach, right? And that's really what these documents are all about. It's about education and teaching. Now, someone can take it or leave it, but if they leave it, if they're Catholic, there are responsibilities and certain things need to be said about that. So with something especially as important as Eucharist.
And at the same time, in this environment that we're in, to think about, we're so divisive anyway.
Mhm.
And I hear people all the time saying there's going to be a schism in the church. There's going to be, and I think, why?
I think the first thing that comes to mind when you say that is, well, that's happened since the Middle Ages, since the very beginning anyway. So, okay, what's another schism, right? But I think also something that's so important and centralized to the faith as the Eucharist, it's important to preach the truth. You look at, this is a great passage when it comes to, and we're going to be looking at this coming up in August because we get 6 weeks of this, but John chapter 6, right? What's interesting is John in his gospel he doesn't have Last Supper narrative. He doesn't actually go through the institution of the Eucharist. He doesn't actually have a consecration narrative where Jesus actually blessed the bread and wine. Part of that's because he's the last writer of the gospel, and Luke, Matthew, and John already kind of did that pretty well. Luke, Matthew, and Mark already kind of did that pretty well. But what he does is his catechesis on the Eucharist comes in John chapter 6. And in John 6, this is right after the breaking of the bread and the feeding of the 5,000. He goes through this dialogue with the disciples and the Pharisees and the people that were at Capernaum about the bread of life, called the bread of life discourse, right? And in it, you get to the very end, there's this great dialogue back and forth about what he means, what he's talking about. And each time he's clarifying more and more what he means by the bread of life. And he says, like, you have to eat my body and drink my blood. And for first century Jews today, for us, like, that seems horrific. Cannibalism, what are you talking about? You can't do that. So it goes from like, okay, well, he's going to give us something to fill our bellies, this bread. Okay, great. Oh, now this bread is my flesh. Whoa, wait a minute. This is actually brought from by my Father through the Spirit. Oh, you're talking about figuratively. This is like a symbol. Oh, okay. No. It's actually my bread. It's actually my body and my blood. Okay, that seems a little extreme. I gotta go. And in John chapter 6, instead of clarifying, maybe having them like come back. Wait, what is what I mean? I mean like sacramentally. He lets them go. He doesn't clarify any further. He says, "This is what it is. This is what I'm giving you, and you can't have life without actually feeding on my flesh and drinking my blood." Now, of course, that comes to deeper understanding of the Eucharist. But that's when we understand it's truly the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. If there's something so important, well, you have to let people walk away with it. You can't lie to them. You have to bring them the truth. And so I think the same way, that's what the bishop's mandate is to bring that truth to the people. And they can take it or leave it. And if they leave it, okay, but there are consequences for that too. Right?
We're losing a lot of Catholics.
Well, that is true. And can I comment on something that you said about, like, we've never had a Catholic politician? So my memory of when Kennedy was elected, I was in high school, was that, and all before he was elected, that the idea was to convince the American public that if there were a president that was Catholic, he would not be making everybody go along with Catholic teaching. And that was a whole thing under my great aunts, like Al Smith or someone that ran, and all of that, and so this was a great triumph and stuff. So what's happening now when like the politicians? I'm just saying this. I'm not saying what I believe, but you could probably guess. Like are upholding the Constitution, but they have their deep personal beliefs. So I know it's a quandary. And then also with Pope Francis, my idea of him is like he's like a whole breath of fresh air, because he seems to be like really not wanting to, but like endeavoring or whatever to be now, not for me to judge, but like most like Jesus would do with preferential treatment for the poor, all of that and
Yeah.
stuff, and all things that are really Catholic things.
Yeah.
So like it is a quandary, it really is, and we are losing a lot of Catholics.
Well, I think
We
so.
are, yeah.
So the first
Yeah.
point, it was that, yeah, you're right. So John F. Kennedy was the first one to kind of bring this understanding into the American idea.
Yeah,
So Al Smith actually was the first politician to actually run for
yeah,
office
right, yeah.
that was Catholic. And the reason so back in the 1920s when he was running against Woodrow Wilson for the presidency, actually even back further than that, was in the teens, I guess, right? It was a real big question because there was a lot of anti-Catholic rhetoric in the United States at the time, right? Mostly because there's a big immigration influx in the United States around these years leading up to that, and most of these were Irish, Italian, German immigrants that were primarily Catholic, and it was perceived that they were going to take jobs and kind of lower the cost of living and kind of destroy the American ideal. And so it was really put to Al Smith, like, well, as a Catholic, well, there was a real fear that, well, now Americans aren't going to run this place, it's going to be the Pope.
Yeah.
But Catholics have always been present in the United States. Actually, as a matter of fact, in the Revolutionary War, 25% of the people in the army were Catholic. And that was the highest denomination in any other denomination in the United States, even though the population of Catholics was the smallest in the United States. So Catholics always contributed to this country. But because of this fear, what Al Smith, rightly or wrongly, he said, I'm going to vote the way the American people want and the way that, is in line with American values. And I'm not going to let the Pope dictate how we're going to run this country, which really is not a bad way of doing it. But also, too, in that context, though, American ideals and Catholic values were aligned, right? There wasn't really a lot of difference between what the Catholic Church taught and what was actually the foundation of the United States, really at all. So now, though, I don't think you can make that claim. And even at the time of John F. Kennedy, I don't think you can make that claim. But when that was put in the water by Al Smith, that kind of took root, and now it's really hard to get out. Because the truth is, and the church has always taught this, that Catholic politicians and Catholic leaders have more responsibility because of their Catholic faith, that they have to live it. And I think there are gradations, right? There are certain things you can say, well, okay, well, does the Constitution really uphold abortion and enshrine it? I don't know if any of you look at the Bill of Rights or the Constitution and say that's really true. Now, a lot of that's been kind of bastardized and kind of taken out of context, and maybe now this is kind of the land of all the land. Well, we can't support that as a church, and neither should any Catholic, right? So, okay, now for a Catholic politician, what do? Well, I want to uphold the laws of the United States, which means maybe I veto these things that comes across my desk. Maybe I abstain from voting in these topics, right? There's ways you can do that within our system that it can still uphold your Catholic beliefs. The problem is these politicians are not taking those options. And a lot of them are openly supporting things that are completely against what the Catholic Church teaches. So what do? Well, I think every bishop, every priest that kind of has a politician in their jurisdiction has a responsibility to that person to have at least a conversation with them. If not, every time they come to Mass, whenever these things happen, to help them understand where the error may be and what their options may be. And if they disregard that and they keep on, being obstinate, well, what else can you do? The fact of the matter, if someone does that and they're obstinate in it, they've already excommunicated themselves from the church. We talk about excommunication. We're not talking about like, oh, this is now a legal thing that the bishop puts on you. The person excommunicates himself. All the bishop is saying is let him know you did it. They're just confirming that. And so we talk about these terms, excommunication or interdict or whatever. That's not started by the bishop. That's started by the individual person doing these things. And they're given every opportunity to correct themselves. But when they don't, what other options do you have? Because I think the other thing I want to keep in mind too, this is not about political power. This is not about money. This is about the person's, not only the person's soul, but also the people that are leading astray by what they're saying too. So the big question when it comes to maybe, politicians receiving the Eucharist, there's a huge amount of scandal in that. And once that's seen, oh, this guy upholds abortion, and then, okay, now he's receiving the Eucharist. Oh, I guess that means I don't have to worry about those teachings either. It's a problem. And so it's not about these kind of really kind of petty worldly things. It's about the good of your soul and the good of the souls of the people that you're influencing. That's what it's about. And it has to be, and we want you to understand these things because it's for your good and their good. That's really the whole point of it. So I didn't get bogged down with these like, well, this person may think this and that's okay. Yeah, okay. Maybe they do personally think it, but if they're called themselves Catholic, they can't promote it and promulgate it. That's really the problem. Or the other option, don't call yourself Catholic. And I think what we're seeing now with a lot of the Catholic politicians, they're using this identity as Catholic to their advantage, and then they're swiping it away when it's against whatever they think, and that's a huge problem too. So where's the correction? And I think that's what the USCCB is trying to do, trying to give some guidelines. Here how we can correct these things. I think the other argument is like, well, why are you weaponizing the Eucharist? Well, it's not a weaponization of the Eucharist. It's following Catholic teaching. It's always been there. Now, they make some good points, like what about other politicians who do these other things? Yeah, same thing applies. But I think a lot of the arguments they make are not necessarily moral issues of the church. They're more prudential issues. So I think, I know there's about 60 politicians who wrote a letter to the USCCB kind of saying, kind of doing some whataboutism about, well, what about these politicians that don't support the border or want to, well, okay, yeah, look, there's a media via there between let's protect our country and let's also be compassionate to people that are legitimately being terrorized and need some place for asylum. We have laws in place. Let's either use laws or make better laws that can actually make it a little more free for people to get asylum. Okay, I don't think anyone's really against that. But when you're saying, well, because you want to build a wall, that means, well, no, that's not what that means. And so a lot of things you're basically trying to impart intention on people. There's no evidence of that intention. So I think that's where it kind of gets into a little different understanding. These are not necessarily moral problems. They're really more of practical solutions. And we can debate those and have different ways of actually, implementing those things. Fine. But to say because someone wants to build a wall, therefore they shouldn't receive communion. Well, wait a minute. That's not, no, I don't think we can make that conclusion. Well, that's much different than this person that supports abortion in every stage of life, every stage of development, and is as adamantly advocating for any type of abortion whatsoever, regardless of issue. Well, that's a little bit different, right? That shows a defect in the conscience that needs to be corrected.
It's a complicated world.
It surely is.
And
It surely is.
And I know that I know there's no simple answers, but I don't know how. The way I think is that, probably throw me out now. The way I think is that I don't think anyone really believes in their heart that abortion's okay. I mean, I think it would go against everything, but I'm not advocating for this or anything. It's always happened. People who have money can always do this and stuff. So, but I think working towards programs and helping people and I've always thought this, but no one ever took me up on this in the past. Like if parishes could adopt altogether and take care of a mother or that was going to have an abortion, do things to just like if people are starving, feed them, so it's programs and things like that. So that's all of that is the answer more than just the law. Because it'll always happen.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Well, I think it's both and, because I think what you're describing is that's what Coalition of Life and there's Our Lady's Inn. There's tons of places out there that do that.
Oh, no, I know, and I know people
Yeah.
do
Yeah,
that, but I
yeah.
mean, more, I don't know, I'm just
I
not
read,
judging,
I
yeah.
read an editorial once that said, instead
Yeah.
of, doing all this marching.
Okay, I was gonna say that, but.
Let's make that the least desirable.
Yeah, yeah.
And all, right, because it does, I mean, I've heard so many stories about people that felt they were forced into an abortion. And I've heard of, a lot of things and reasons, but I think most people that would do this would be desperate and,
I agree.
Yeah.
And I think that goes back to the understanding of what we talk about the moral act compared to sin.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. It's a both and I think that's what the church tries to do. It tries to give options, whether it be through Knights of Columbus or Coalition for Life or 4 Days for Life or any of the other organizations that really give options about here's where you can go and have your needs met. But I think also the fact when we talk about law, which you're right, that may be like the least influential battleground. But I think it comes to an issue of justice. And when we talk about laws, we have to look at, is this a just law? And the problem with abortion is it's not a just law. You're talking about the taking of a human life. Now, first, legitimately, especially if the life of the mother is in danger. Well, in those morally speaking, in those instances, abortion could be done, but it can't be willfully done. So what I mean by that is, let's say a mother has developed cancer and needs a hysterectomy, but she's pregnant, right? Now, when the principle we call double effect, if the doctor goes in and tries to operate to remove part of the uterus, but the baby ends up dying in the process, that is not an immoral action, right? It was not the willful taking of the life of the child that was the purpose of that surgery. It was actually meant to help the mother. The problem when we talk about the law, though, is that when you're saying that let's say development stage, let's say let's say up to 3 months, right? A zygote in the early stages of life of the 3 months, legally speaking, we'll say that's really the cutoff and that's fine. What we would say though is, either way, it's not fine because it's taking of a life no matter what. And you're talking not even an innocent life, a life that has had no say in this, has done nothing wrong. So what's due to that life? Well, to be born for one. And yeah, regardless of the mother or father or whatever's going on in the family, okay, we have options for you. We have millions of couples who are infertile that would love to have a child. We have these centers, places you can go to uphold for your financial well-being or whatever else you want to raise a child on your own. We have options for you. And I think you're right. I think for the most part, probably a majority of people don't see abortion as wrong.
Well, I think they do. I think they do think it's wrong. They think it's wrong. I can't imagine someone would think it's, I'm sure there are people that think it's wrong. But like, say we just hypothetically have this politician who is so pro-life and every other thing, but has this one thing where we might have some others that are upholding, many others that are upholding this one issue, but not all the other pro-lives. What a dilemma, like for the church, in a sense, because so I just remember with Vatican II, that was the wonderful thing because it was, this judging was going away. And he without sin throw the first stone or whatever. And so it seems to have taken a full turn back in my mind.
Well,
I don't know if this is true or.
Let me probably maybe push a little bit on that too. When you say Vatican II, what do you mean? What specific Vatican II came out and said we're not looking at this?
Oh no, okay. So I remember growing up where everything was sin and judging and sin, and then I actually left the church when in my 20s, and then came back after I had my first child. And the charismatic movement, I was living in Atlanta, that was really what drew me back.
Sure.
And that intensely drew me back. And it was forgiving, loving. And then there was not a lot of judging. Having grown up before Vatican II in the Northeast, everything was a sin. I mean, it became almost a joke if you're a Catholic, a sin. Then, of course, after that, it was more forgiveness. And and on love and not sounding like hippies, but like things were not, people weren't judged for every single thing. I can't explain this. So, but it seems to have like taken another turn lately. Now I'm very pro-Catholic, so don't think I'm like.
Well,
but
I wonder though. We have also, I think we talked about this before too. We have to be very clear about what we mean by sin and what we mean by moral act, because not every moral act is sinful. I should say, not every immoral act is sinful, but every sin is an immoral act.
Okay.
So what I mean by that is, you can say robbing a bank. You know, robbing a bank is not good. That's not very moral.
Oh, it's not a sin.
For that. Give me a minute.
Okay.
That's not a moral thing to do. But I can't say objectively whether it's a sin or not.
Oh, okay.
And the reason I can't say if it's a sin is because I don't know if that person knows it's wrong. And I don't know if that person's doing it anyway if they know it's wrong. So I can't say it's sinful for that. Now, if I did, I know it's a sin because my conscience is formed in that way and understands what a moral action is, and that because that just doing that, you're taking something that's wrong to you. You're not treating the other way they want to be treated, and therefore that's wrong, and I should not do it. I can't say that for another person, though. So I could say that's an immoral action. I can't say it's a sin. Because the only person who can judge that's a sin or not will be the person doing it. Right? And that's, I think, what you're kind of getting at. That's always been the church teaching, is that there's a difference between moral action and a sin, because a sin is always subjective. That if I'm in the confessional, someone's confessing to me, I'm assuming everything they're telling me is a mortal sin because they would be the person to know. I wouldn't know. I can say what they're telling me is immoral, sure. But whether it's actually a mortal sin or not, that's up to the person telling me. Right?
I think
That's
that's
kind
kind
of
of what you're
scary.
saying is
Yeah.
when we were growing up, there was a lot of Catholic guilt.
Sure.
Oh, and yes,
And I
and
think we kind of got away from that a little bit.
Sure.
And now maybe we're.
Well, I think that's the thing is, yeah, right, of course. Look, Jesus is love, Jesus is truth, but also Jesus is both those things. And if there's a conflict between those things, love should conquer, I agree, but it all should be done in truth as well.
Oh yeah, I'm
So I think what we're talking about here is
Yeah.
UCB is trying to find a way of doing that.
right, a way of doing that. But like the sin about the judging sin. So with this Catholic guilt, we may think things are wrong, more wrong if you can say this than someone else.
Right.
Okay, so.
Here's the thing. Let's say in that instance, let's say I see someone robbing a bank.
Yeah.
As a faithful Catholic, I have an obligation to at least inform that person that what they're doing is wrong. It's like, hey, and maybe come to understanding, like, hey, I see you're robbing a bank. Why are you doing that?
I was shouting at you.
Right. Yeah, right, exactly. But it's not even that. It's like, well, does that money belong to you? Well, no. Well, why are you doing this? Well, I want to buy a sports car. Okay, well, there's other ways you probably buy a sports car, which is actually better for you and for everyone else. I have an obligation to actually engage in that respect some way, right? Inform that person what they're doing is wrong. It's still up to them to accept it or not, right? We call that forming someone's conscience, right? All the church does is inform the conscience to say, here's what Jesus has taught us about what it means to live a Christian life. Here we have the Ten Commandments, we have the Beatitudes, we have these writings of Christ and the evangelists that tell us how Christ lived and wants us to live. You can take it and do that, or not. When we talk about judging, we have to make a distinction between judging an action and judging a person. Now, I can judge that action and say that's a wrong thing to do because you're taking from someone that doesn't belong to you. That's wrong. Would you want someone to do that to you? Well, no. Okay, then you shouldn't do it, right? But I can't say that person's a robber and deserves damnation and punishment because I don't know. That's up to Jesus, not me, right? I think that's a distinction. As Christians, we're called to judge actions. That's when we know if something's right or wrong, right? An act of the conscience, right? We're not called to judge people. So you know what? Yeah, I'm still this because my family's starving. I've been looking for a job for months. I'm at my wit's end. I don't know what else to do. Okay. Well, why don't you just leave that on? Let me help you. Come with me. Right. That's a Christian thing to do. But a lot of it depends on the circumstance. The culpability is also by that too, right? So, like for instance, let's go back to the stealing thing. Is it immoral for a starving man to steal a loaf of bread from Schnucks to feed his family?
No.
I think it's still wrong. It's still immoral action, but I think that the culpability is greatly reduced because of the circumstances, to the point where I don't even think it could be a sin, right? You're right. You don't have any other means otherwise. Now you can ask the question, like, have you tried everything else? What if you tried? What have you done? But I think there could be a situation where someone is at the very breaking point and they have no other options left. Okay. Based on the circumstance you're in, I don't think that would be sinful. I maybe can help you find some better options, which would be a responsibility I have for you. But I can't judge you based on that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
do understand. I do understand that.
Right.
Yeah. No, I do. I guess I meant that like Jesus calling us all to come to him. So like by going to communion and someone like the bishops having that to outlaw communion to people who are publicly saying something. I don't, isn't that?
Well, but here's the thing, we have to
Yeah.
understand what communion is. So communion being the body and blood of Jesus Christ, right?
Right.
We're supposed to receive him in a state of grace, meaning without sin. Now you're right, it's perfectly possible for these people maybe to be in a state of grace because maybe they don't know it's a sin.
Well, maybe how about knowing and not feeling? Is there like
There's
Yeah.
there's a difference between those two.
What?
So for instance, okay, so if you're saying, okay, let's say, oh man, I have a lot of external pressure that's pressuring me from my party, from my people in my family, maybe even my constituency that want me to uphold abortion as something we should be done. But I personally know that's wrong, right? Well, is fear a valid reason to do something?
I don't think so, but what about like something about like, now I don't know, this is also kind of controversial or something, but like choosing the lesser of two evils, like, and so if you are trying to hold, and we don't even have to use the abortion thing, but
Okay.
in any case, I know we've always been taught that the end never justifies the means.
Correct.
But in some way, and which is really true, yeah. I mean, but sometimes in life you have to pick something that is less evil. You
Sure.
have to make, and so like,
I would say every election we've had so far since I've been alive has been the less.
well, absolutely,
Yeah, right.
because that's
Yeah.
a human complex,
Right,
you would
exactly,
think.
yeah.
So it is. So perhaps these politicians that are upholding this are really only because they. I can't even explain what I'm saying, is that they're choosing this as a lesser of two evils because they feel that they could do more good by not promoting it, but not vetoing it. You know what I mean? So I don't know. So what?
Well, see, but I think the
Yeah.
politicians we're talking about that really are going to be affected by this
Yeah.
are the ones that don't fall in that category. These are ones that are openly promoting it in every aspect they can possibly get. And so I think you're absolutely right. There could be circumstances where it's like, okay, well, let's see. There's abortion laws coming up. In order to get this funding law for like maybe these charitable organizations, I know I have to make a deal in order to actually make this happen, right? Which means if I don't do this, if I don't sign this law about upholding abortion right, I'm not going to be able to pass this law that's going to fund these charitable organizations to help these homeless people,
Millions of people. Yeah.
right? Yeah, that's a bad thing, right? But what is the lesser evil, though? I think the lesser evil actually is still not to do anything because you're still promoting the death of potentially thousands and millions of people, right? Yeah, yes, you're right. There are valid reasons there should be lesser to evil here,
Yeah,
but
lesser to,
the
yeah.
nature of abortion itself, though, is
Yeah.
always an evil.
No, it is always an evil, and
Yeah.
it's always been like, I mean, I have to say, I have no personal experience with anyone with this, but I do know, and I've heard of stories of people and stories of other people. And I even remember, this is going to be really awful to say, but I remember in the old days, I won't say where I grew up and all, when people had an unexpected child married, they may start doing a lot of lawn mowing and extra things, which, what is that? You know what I mean? Like, so, and that was with the, I only know the talk in the neighborhood, and so there's always, and then you hear about these back alley things, and I heard of somebody who told me of some cousin or someone that went to another country, this is before it was legal for, because, so it's not, it doesn't, I don't know, it's an evil that's always been present and always will, and I just feel like there has to be some way to stop it by making it pleasant to have your child.
I agree. I think you're right. I think there are certain things we can do, whether it be a church or even political realm, maybe promote those things. You're absolutely right. I don't disagree with that at all.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone would.
No, I don't know.
But I think going back to, these politicians who are kind of these positions, you're right, they're very well, it could be these things where lesser people are taken, but I don't think you can say that. There could be opportunities out there, maybe that would be the case. But I don't think you can really say that with the topic of abortion. I think that's really where we have to get kind of like, that's something so gravely wrong about that I don't think you can justify it in any circumstance. And I think the church would say the same thing. Because there are other morally grave things too. The church say, we can't condone that. I think go to the death penalty. I mean, now it's sort of like there's. It's funny. We're in our. I sit on the board for Respect Life Possibly. I'm a little biased because of this, but we're reading Evangelium Vitae and doing a lectio on that document from John Paul II. And it's funny because John Paul II, he was saying, especially in the first world, and he was saying this even universally, there's virtually no reason why the death penalty should be in place, right? Because nowadays in society we have today, we have such good systems and procedures in place that it'd be virtually impossible for anyone that could cause such damage to society to actually have to be destroyed, right? And so I think it's a good reason. And I think we have to uphold that too, right? So in the same way, if you have Catholic politicians like, yep, death penalty, let's bring it on, whatever, I don't care what they did, there's no hope for them. Well, that's not what we teach either. But I think I always put these in perspective, it's always for the good. And it's always in love and truth. And love cannot help but be in line with truth. And sometimes the most loving and truthful thing you can do is reprimand somebody for the good of their soul and the good of other souls. And again, not condemning, but admonishing. Admonishing means take them by the hand, right? And so help them see this is a good that we need to actually uphold. And if someone's going to be obstinate in it and they're calling themselves Catholic, that's a problem. I think that's the other issue. If this were like a Baptist, or this were a Hindu, or if this were a Muslim or a Jewish person doing this, we would have no say in it. It's like, well, if that's what they believe, that's what they believe. I mean, we have our own understanding of what Jesus gave us, and if they want to subscribe to that, okay. We'll hope for the best. We'll pray for you. But when you have someone that's calling themselves Catholic, and that are not holding up the teachings of the church, that's a problem regardless of who you are. Regardless. Now we could write say maybe just don't understand what the good may be. Okay, then you know what? I have to do a better job of that then. I have to do a better job of informing, we have to do a better job of educating, helping them understand why this is a good. Maybe delve through some of the particular circumstances why this may be justified or not. But that's a separate issue than, abortion at all levels, no matter what, let's do it. And so your last question, I think, this seems like forever ago. Did we cover all those, I think, or no? All right, pretty soon, okay.
The only one was that priest in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
He sounds like a nut.
And I think that's another extreme though too, Ellen, because, I think there's a level, I think again, it goes back to obedience, right? That I know, for instance, I know the one you're talking about, and this particular priest, he actually was calling out people by name in his homilies and certain aspects online. And that's always a danger because, again, it gets back to that whole condemning thing, right? When in the seminary, we're taught when it comes to like homiletics, that kind of thing, right? It's never wrong to talk about issues. It's never wrong to talk about issues. When you start talking about people or parties or groups, that's where you need to be very careful. And I think what we're seeing here, what you're kind of brought up was kind of two extremes, right? You have the extreme of like, anything goes, let them do whatever, it's fine. And, oh no, we have to condemn these people right away and destroy them. The church is squarely in the middle there, right? It is about love and acceptance and bringing everyone in, right? In truth and love. And in these extremes, it's sort of like, well, like, again, the same way that you do admonishment. Well, Father, that's not really a good way of kind of bringing people in. And that's your job as a priest, right? If you want to talk about like maybe lack of information, or if you want to maybe help, or even meet with these people or try to get to meet with these people and talk to them, God bless you, that's your job, right? Do it. But condemning them and doing these type of things, that's not within your mandate as a priest. And the bishop needs to rein you in. And if you're not being reined in, there should be consequences of that too. Because out of obedience, right? And again, he can maybe make the argument, well, this is the obedience is for the good of everyone else. I'm trying to avoid scandal, help people understand this. There's better ways of doing that, Father. And so I think if you're talking about people and condemning them that way, the highest form of excommunication for him, which that probably won't get to that point, but he could definitely take away his faculties as a priest. And maybe that's where we're going for that point. Yeah, so you got a big breath there. There's a kind of a both hand for both of them, right? It's sort of like, we don't want to be over here and let, hey, look, just whatever you want. That's not what we're all about either. And we don't want to be over here saying, oh, all you guys who don't believe what the church teaches. No, it's neither of those. We're squarely in the middle here.
That was the one that got the headline.
Yeah. It's unfortunate, because I think that it also causes damage and scandal to the church too, right? So, yeah, you got a good range there. That was good. That was a good breath. So, good.
I way made your point.
Oh,
That's good. Yeah.
nowhere near any of these.
Awesome. Great. Let's do a palate cleanser. I love these. Perfect.
Okay, so we just celebrated the Nativity of St. John the Baptist.
Yep. On June 24th.
Yes, okay. 24th, 25th.
Yep.
Okay. Why is the importance of his nativity along with Mary's nativity and Jesus' nativity?
Well, primarily because John the Baptist is the last prophet of the Old Testament, right? So John the Baptist his death brings a closure of the Old Testament, right? And so it's also a marker of the rising of Christ, right? So
Correct.
John the Baptist's role is to be he's supposed to clear the way for the coming of Jesus.
Okay.
He does it by his birth and also by his death.
So listening to a podcast, here we go,
Mhm.
they were talking about the nativity of St. John the Baptist and said, and this was the first time I had heard it, and they said they had heard it before. I'm like, I'd never heard of that. St. John the Baptist was born without sin.
Oh, I heard of that.
And they're not conceived without sin, but born without sin, because at the visitation, the Holy Spirit descended upon Elizabeth's
I
womb.
heard the exact sermon.
And I was like, this was the first time I had ever heard this, and that's why I asked my first question as to why the nativity of St. John the Baptist. And I mean, I was just like, why haven't I not heard this before? But he was not.
That Tim Gray?
No, it wasn't. So it's so Tim Gray as well, possibly.
I know, I heard the same thing.
And I was just like, why hasn't anyone ever said this to me before? And I was just kind of like, what in the world?
Well, I will say that I've never heard that either. So I'm going to turn Zoom off because I was on there anyway. If that's something that is taught by the church, I've never heard it. Because my understanding is the only two that have been conceived or born without sin have been Jesus and Mary.
And there was a specific distinction saying that he was born, not conceived. And I was just like,
And they said it
wow.
was at the visitation.
Yes, it was at the
When
visitation.
he leaped in.
In the Elizabeth.
So I would say there's certainly a recognition by John through the gifts of the Holy Spirit of the coming of Jesus. That there would be an intimate relationship between them because of that. But what I think we're getting at then would be, does that mean that John would not need to be baptized? And I don't think that's true. I think John
Jesus didn't need to be baptized either, but.
But that's a different story. The reason why Jesus was baptized is to allow us to be baptized.
Right.
So Mary would have been baptized, even though she didn't need it, right? We hold that. We would hold that John the Baptist would have been baptized too.
Who would have baptized him?
Yeah.
Jesus,
You did?
sure. But even when Jesus, and was baptized by Jesus, could have been baptized, right? Because there's a distinction between the baptism of John and the baptism of Jesus Christ, right? Yes. So I think we need to be very cognizant. I would have to do some research on that. So let me check. But that's news
It
to
just
me.
blew me away. I mean, I saved my podcast, tonight, but I was just like, Lord. I was like, oh my gosh.
You both
Actually, Father
different
Chris Smith just went on pilgrimage with him and the woman that he does podcasts with.
Okay, so let me check on that because I'd have to check on that.
It stopped
Do
me.
you know? Did he didn't give a reference on that at all?
Actually, the woman's father was a deacon and had preached this for years. And I was just like, whoa. And that I want to say the Diocese of Arlington, Virginia, but I can find out.
Yeah, that sounds. Oh, let's put it this way. I don't think it's impossible to say that.
Right.
I don't know if that's ever been tradition of the church or taught by the church. So I won't say it's not true because I don't know. But I've never heard that upheld in the tradition of the church.
It's interesting that you said you heard it.
Yes, I can't remember.
Yeah.
And I really didn't think anything on it. I just thought it was one of those things where I never paid attention.
It just blew me away. I was like,
Maybe that's
Yeah,
not true.
you know-
Maybe we did learn it.
And that's one thing. That's one thing about homilies are kind of, homilies are wonderful things that are supposed to kind of enliven the word and bring kind of more deeper understanding. But I think sometimes we as preachers, we tend to maybe go off things we've heard and not maybe put that in the context of, well, this is just kind of an understanding. This isn't really definitively taught by the church. One thing I'm very cognizant in preaching is I always try to say, you can hold this or not hold this. This is something that's not really being taught definitively. And I would imagine that maybe fall in the same way. But I don't know if we would say that John the Baptist did not need the sacrament of baptism. I'd have to look at that and figure that out.
it was at the visitation. That's why.
Yeah, I mean, the visitation is important.
They
Yeah,
specifically talked about it not being conceived at the
Right.
time of his conception,
right.
but at the time of the visitation.
And we would say that, yeah,
It was removed.
yeah.
Cleansed of sin.
Yeah, that would be. I could see where we can maybe possibly conclude that, but I don't know if that's ever been upheld. I'll check on that.
That's why I had to start with I said, I've got to start with my first question, why we celebrate that as the nativity.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah, I mean, primarily it's the importance of John the Baptist's role, obviously.
and that's my understanding
Yeah.
all along
Yeah.
until this, and I was like, whoa.
Yeah, I'd have to look into that. I'll get back on that one. I've talked to some people smarter than I about that too, to figure that out. No, I've never heard that, whether it be in seminary or otherwise. So that's news. So, okay, we'll check it out. All right.
Do you happen to know what really happened with the lady from Catholic Charities who was fired?
Oh, no. No, I don't really get involved with a lot of that stuff. I don't know.
Another thing that was in the paper, and then I never really heard anything about it.
Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea. I thought this is like, what we tend to find is whenever there's a new change in leadership, that kind of just happens. Just because it's not necessarily like anything the new archbishop is doing. It's just like, I think there's a lot of changeover sometimes because of comfort level.
They specifically, well, it was in Tony Messenger's column, and he specifically said that the woman that was advocating for Medicare in Missouri,
Mm-hmm.
for Medicaid,
Right,
Medicaid expansion in Missouri,
right.
that she was fired because one of the senators who's holding up that whole process called the Archbishop and complained about her with the whole contraception thing.
I don't know.
I just was curious, like,
When it comes to anything, especially in a secular newspaper, I know Tony Messenger, I think he's Catholic, I think he is, at least he calls it, he's nominally Catholic. I always take that with a grain of salt. I would probably want to read the press release that comes from the Archdiocese on that.
that's the thing about, it's never in the review.
Yeah.
They never publish stuff like that.
It's online. All that stuff is online.
Always online.
So yeah, or it may be buried in the review because when it comes to personnel things, usually that's kind of more personal nature anyway. But I've not heard that. I do know that the Missouri bishops were actually trying to pass Medicaid just because of the benefits. So that wouldn't really jive, I don't think.
I know.
So that doesn't really sound right. And again, when it comes to like even editorials, you always have to, like, same with the homilies. Unless he's citing some resources there, I would be like, okay, that's a great opinion, but that seems like a conclusion that's not substantiated. And I don't know. Maybe it is. I have no idea, but I don't know. Like I said, I have more. Typically, I don't really care either. I mean, when it comes to like stuff like that, when it comes to those type of changes, like, great, whatever, I don't have, really doesn't have any impact on me whatsoever, or really the parish for that matter. I'm more concerned about hiring a youth minister to get some more people in here. So,
Are you happy?
yeah. So I think she's gonna be awesome.
Oh, good.
So she has 2 girls in school now. We're going to be 7th graders,
Nice.
and she has a younger one too. So she was a teacher over at Margaret Scotland for a long time. So I think she's gonna be a really good fit. So we'll see how, I think it's gonna be fine. And it's funny because the other person we were interviewing, she actually took the job as the teacher at the school too. So it worked out kind of well with all that stuff. Yeah, so very good.
So what will the youth minister do?
Well, hopefully develop a youth ministry here, get the youth group together. But then that's start branching out. Hopefully, like maybe get a middle school program together, and then ideally within about the next 5 to 10 years, maybe a young adults program. So maybe even kind of get into RCAA. So I think the potential there is to become like kind of a what they call DRE, a director of religious education, which I think that'd be really beneficial for the parish. But I think now we're just trying to get the youth group together. So that's the
Like a youth group for middle, which would be like
high
fifth
school
grade.
kids.
Oh, middle
High school
grade.
kids
Oh, high school
primarily
kids.
first,
Okay.
and then maybe set up a feeder program from the middle school. Then eventually branch out like college and younger
Sounds good.
adults,
Yeah.
young families. So that's kind of the long-term vision right now. We just want to get her in office and get her situated. That's for the first step, and then let her kind of develop that program over the summer and into the fall.
Didn't we have any CYO or anything here, right?
CYO is kind of really that
Is
kind
that
of.
out now? or-
Well, came like CYO was more like youth, more broad, right?
Yeah.
And now I think it's just primarily like the office of youth ministries at the Archdiocese level. And that covers like Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, youth sports, a youth ministry, and that's kind of this primary function. CYC though is primarily just not for the sports. So it's funny because like I hear about these organizations that like would have mixers and stuff like in the parish. And I know when I was growing up, there were certain parishes that did that still,
Yeah.
which I thought was really great because they actually like kind of taught you how to interact socially with the opposite sex and kind of taught you how to ask someone for a dance, like even like out on a date, which is really kind of beneficial. And you don't see that anymore.
No, you don't. Yeah.
One thing is funny because Father Martin, after him, Father Fallon, one thing they ask every candidate who comes through the door at the seminary is if you've ever been on a date. And the reason they ask that's not like, check their chastity. It's really more if you have the courage to ask a woman on a date, or if you don't have the courage to ask a woman on a date, then you don't have the courage to actually ask God to be a priest. And it's kind of an interesting, good logic, I think. But I think that's things. These opportunities have been diminished so much. And I think part of that, it's funny, like when we talk about, we see the numbers now, like there's a lot less people getting married or even like going on dates anymore. And I don't know, a couple of years ago, there was I think it was Boston University had a class where it was like, I think it was a communications class, but part of the assignment was they actually had asked someone out on a date.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And it was amazing how hard it was for these college students to do that because their whole life has been. So I think those opportunities are being more and more diminished. And what we see today is when it comes to like those social interactions, I always say this, if I had a young male friend, Catholic friend, who's looking to find a good Catholic woman, there are probably literally 13 places I could send him here in these Archdiocese of St. Louis.
13? Like
13. They can go to places, it's overpopulated by these women
Oh,
that
okay.
are good
yeah.
faithful women that want, are looking for a guy. I can't say the same thing if I had a good Catholic girlfriend, right?
Hmm.
Because a lot of these things that the youth ministry puts on for like young adults it's really women dominated.
Yeah.
So the question rises, and we've talked about the seminary and all types of things, like what's a good way we can engage the men to get them involved, you know?
Mhm.
And I think with them, it's more of, well, if you had like a workshop on like how to make a lure, or maybe like a car repair workshop, and put like faith, we have a faith dimension to it. I think you're more prone to get a lot more men to come to that than maybe like the Theology on Taps used to have, right? If you ever been to a Theology on Tap, it's like they would have at a bar, it would be like a talk by somebody, but they have like, these, I think they have reduced drink price, whatever. But you would have like 95% women there. And most of the guys were seminarians or priests. It's like, well, that's not good. Right. So it's interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting situation. See, so I don't know if we can do something with youth ministry. We get that going here. I don't know. I think that would be beneficial to have like some more of those mixers and some more of those opportunities actually that I can't have that social interaction. Because what we're seeing now is it's just not there.
Yeah. Look, in the old days, we always had like dances.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was the St. Mary's dance.
Right.
And then the Knights of Columbus dance.
Mm-hmm.
And even in New York, they had, where I was working there, it was CYA. It was a Catholic, and they had a dance place. And let me tell you something, that was really probably a kind of crazy place. It was out on the island. Someone said we should call this divorce haven. But my kids were really involved in the CYO, they grew up in another state, but in fact, my oldest daughter was actually the only, probably, I don't know if anyone ever did this after, but she was the only first one on the parish council to be the youth representative for the CYO.
No.
And so, but they did a whole lot of stuff, and there were boys in there. And,
Yeah.
And,
from what I understand, here in St.
Yeah.
Louis, there's a lot of those organizations that were around, and it was really beneficial.
Yeah.
But for some reason or another, I don't know what happened. They just kind of all.
Yeah, they jumped in
Jillian
there.
was one too, I know, that they had done, formally meet each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dances
Yeah,
and
right.
rather than-
But even those are kind of few and far between. I don't know why that's happening. If it's just like a funding, I don't know. I have no idea.
Maybe lack of interest, like you said.
Well, it used to be. I think it also used to be the associate pastors were in charge of that.
Yeah.
And then as we had less and less people being ordained, you had less and less opportunity, I think, to bring those about. That could be a factor. I have no idea. Yeah, I don't know. So you're saying you're interested to get that ball? You want to be the head of that?
Oh, no, I don't want to be, I'm just
okay.
interested in it because I have like two 10-year-old granddaughters, one about to be 10, one 10, one 8-year-old around you. So I'm just, for the
Yeah.
future.
I think that might be a little bit too young. Maybe we can look
No,
at
I meant for your future.
Yeah.
For the future,
Yeah, but I think we said I know in 7th grade we started having mixers. And it would happen all around like this, all around. I think with Seven Holy Founders had one. Who else in the city? I don't know if anyone in the city.
St. Mary Magdalene years ago would have.
Yeah, by the time I was there, they weren't really
sure.
involved anymore.
Yeah.
SARS, I think, had one. SARS had one.
Soros had a lot, because they had the play.
Yeah.
dances.
Still active
Yeah,
CYC there.
Then the high schools would actually have them too for 7th and 8th graders when I was growing up. So, but I don't know if they're happening anymore. I don't think high schools are doing them anymore. I don't know.
Since all of COVID, I haven't heard anything.
There's
Yeah,
not-
I didn't even think before COVID, I think they weren't doing me either.
You don't just do it a year. Yeah, but I remember this is a really weird thing, like when I was going into 7th grade, the bishop decided that, this is so silly, but there were too many, possibility of too many unwed mothers, although I didn't know anything. So the girls had to be separated from 6th to 8th grade. And then you could not go to a dance until you were in high school. So the YMCA in those days was questionable.
Mm.
I don't know if you ever heard of that, did you?
Yes.
Oh yeah, very questionable. So the priests would stay outside to make sure there were no Catholics in you, right? I was going, but you use the YMCA for like swimming and
Right.
dance
Right.
stuff. But I thought that was so crazy. And then as a little humorous thing, the brothers taught the boys, and there was the Sacred Heart statue. So in those days, girls, the 8th grade girls had the assignment of dusting the statues. So all the girls would go like 6 times a day. You had freedom, and they could dusting the statues, and the boys were all like. So finally, that brother Michael came and said, "This can't stop. It has to end. So we'll dust the statue ourselves." That's how silly things were then. It's really so.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah.
It was so. I mean, this was serious business. This was and all these talks about unwed mother. Nobody even really knew how to be an unwed mother, let alone let alone be one. It was just
Yeah,
so odd.
sometimes like there's things implemented, or
So-
there's a trend maybe being seen, or maybe it's not even a trend, maybe it's just like a couple examples, and they're
And they-
debate on that, and then
No, it was really, we lived through it,
Yeah.
but it was like
Yeah.
really weird, but that was how that was, the separation, but.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing that kind of redeveloped here in the Archdiocese, or maybe in the parish level.
Oh, yeah, I think it would be a nice thing,
I think
because
so
I
too.
remember that was a fun
Yeah.
thing, and do you remember that, how fun it was nice, and,
Yeah.
get people in.
Yeah, I think there's also just level of like, I don't know. I understand you want to keep kids as long as possible, but I think also too, there's such an influence in society with social media and other things that kind of like are trying to
There's no
adultize
innocence.
kids
Oh, yeah,
so
fast, yeah.
quickly
Yeah,
that if we don't keep on the front of that, it can go south really quick. And so I think schools, churches, we have an opportunity and obligation to kind of teach young men, young women, here's appropriate ways of interacting with the opposite sex. And here's how you treat someone with dignity and respect of the opposite sex. I think that's lacking just in general now in society.
Because there's so little face-to-face, person-to-person.
Exactly.
All screen.
And I think, and I mean, fortunately, as sometimes as much of a godsend it was this last year to have technology be available to kind of have these opportunities to still learn and grow, there's also detriments to it too. And I think we need to temper that in some way. So maybe this is an opportunity, maybe it's something to really pray about. We can maybe talk about that and see if we can get that going here. I don't know.
Here I'm saying how wonderful it is, but not volunteering, but I feel like nobody would pay attention to an old person making a dance or something. Be serious.
I don't know. Well, I remember when I was in grade school. It was I don't know how their PE teacher was, but they had a swear dance. It was very awkward,
No, I remember.
but I'm happy you did it. I mean, it was like okay,
yeah. The swear dance.
yeah. I mean, it was like all right. I mean, I don't know why we're doing this, but okay. I mean, it was in the same way though. It's like you're partnered with a girl, and it's like, oh, this is weird. Okay, and like I mean, you know them because they're in your class for like the last 5-6 years, but it's also like weird because now you're actually touching each other in a way you've never touched them before, and it's like, what are we doing? Which is good though. I think that's good. Like this is a healthy way of actually engaging with somebody.
No, I think it would.
And I think some people. I think that's the other thing too. The kids today need that awkwardness. They need how to understand and deal with those type of situations.
Right.
Which I think because of this, they're not really experiencing that anymore.
A little bit backward.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a different thing. But
Yeah.
I have 2 grandsons that one's 17 and one is 14. And so one's in 8th grade going into 9th grade, one's going to 10th grade in Tennessee. And they each, what grade they went to a dance. But I said, did you know, Connor, whichever one it was, Douglas and Connor, did they, oh no, Mom, my daughter said, no, they just dance. But there were girls and boys and they all just danced.
Oh,
So that was
yeah.
so hard.
Yeah, I mean,
But they were all
yeah,
dressed
well,
up for this and, yeah.
I think it's from our generation too. Like, you know, when we dated, usually dating in groups. Like, you go to the mall, a group of guys go to the mall with a group of girls. You walk around with each other. And when it came to dances, yeah, when it came to like dances, we're like, okay, we would like dance together in a big group, except for the slow dances.
Oh, yeah, the slow dance.
So slow dance came around, you would actually go with your partner, you know, whatever. But I mean, I don't think people know how to. I think one of the challenges there today would be if you had one of those dances,
Having
based on
lessons,
the music.
yeah.
Well, based on the
Yeah.
music you have today,
Yeah.
I don't know what kind of dance moves you really would see out there, if you want to see them.
Well,
know.
it wasn't, that was a complaint of one of my daughters coming back from a high school dance.
Yeah,
It was. Oh.
Oh, yeah.
I think part of that is you have to pick I think you have to pick the proper music too. And I think there's a when it comes to dances, there's always kind of the you want to use the most popular music because that's what the kids are listening to, which is great. But a lot of times when the dance moves that go along with that music is highly inappropriate. And so where do you draw the line there? You know, maybe just come back with a nun saying 3 feet apart, ladies and gentlemen, leave room for the Holy Spirit. Maybe that's what it comes down to. I don't know. But that would take a lot of policing, I think, in certain aspects.
And then probably the end of the dance.
Right. And if you had no volunteers, I think it probably could work. But I mean, I maybe that's something we can look at. I'm not sure.
I think it really would be good, and like maybe they could start with dance lessons and all. Oh yeah, it's getting late. Yeah.
Nice to see you.
Oh, nice to see you. Yeah.
Thank you.
But I mean, there's lots of good things that
Yeah.
could happen.
Yeah, I think it's something you can
Yeah.
mention. Maybe we talk to her about, see if she can maybe get something together with that
It
too.
is,
I think we'll give some time. I don't think it's gonna be next week.
Oh yeah,
next
no,
month, but we'll
yeah.
definitely maybe look
Oh
at that
yeah.
in the near
not,
future. Yeah, sure.
Maybe people wouldn't be interested, but.
Yep,
yeah,
We'll see. We'll see.
'cause-
Thanks, Aubrey.
Yeah, thank
You're welcome,
you.
guys.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for coming.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
And
Everyone.
next week will be Friendship and Faith. So the talk will be discussing why there are certain forms of government that are considered legitimate by the church and certain that are not.
But certain forms of government.
Governments. Being that 4th of July, I think it's good to maybe talk about certain governments in the world, you know, especially in today's society, we see kind of this revolution in a way, and maybe looking at the consequences of that, maybe why there are certain governments that the church says, yeah, it's probably best to follow these ideals rather than others. And we're just going to talk, that's going to be kind of a topic next week.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah.
We make it.
Okay. Well, we also tape it again, so it'll be on
Oh yeah.
YouTube, Facebook.
I always,
so-
yeah. But mine seems to always like. That's why I drag myself in person because it seems like it breaks up, and you get to an interesting thing, and then I can't
Oh,
hear the
I
rest
did
of
feel
it.
that,
Yeah.
that it was kind of hard to.
But it could be my